Hello and welcome to Arts Alive Books. My name is Jerry Smith. Joining me tonight is McGull-born author James Rice, who is going to be discussing his debut novel, Alice and the Fly. Welcome, James.
Thank you.
Before we get on to the novel, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got interested in writing?
Yeah, sure. So I was born in McGull, like you said, which is just kind of down the road from Liverpool. I've been writing for as long as I can remember, really. When I was younger, I remember once my dad sort of coming out and telling me I was always kind of had a big imagination, and I remember telling him that I wanted to, I never wanted to stop kind of playing games essentially, and he said, "Oh, you should become a writer then, because then you get to carry on." And I remember thinking then, but I don't know how young I was then. I think I was probably about 6 or something. So I've written ever since then. I've always written stories and novels and series and comics and all kinds of stuff. And my poor dad's had to read it all. So then I did the. So when I came to deciding on a university course, I decided I wanted to carry it on and be a writer. 'Cause it's a good thing to say that you want to be really a writer. Like, it's something that keeps your parents and everyone else off your back, because it's kind of an arty kind of thing to do. So it's like saying you want to be a musician or an actor or something, but it's got a slight intellectual edge, so you can kind of get away with. People go, "Oh yeah, that's a good profession." So I did a BA and then an MA doing creative writing in Liverpool John Moores University.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of led on to this, really. I started this novel on my MA, carried it on for a few years since, and about a year and a bit ago, I signed with Hodder and Stoughton, and here I am.
Bob's your uncle.
Yeah.
I'll come back to the degree in a moment, but when you were growing up and you're kind of interested in writing, and was there anybody who was particularly influential on you then? Favorite books or authors?
Yeah, I mean, when I was little, I read when I was little, but I didn't read as much as I do now. Like, I read like a heck of a lot of stuff now. Like, I just read all the time. But when I was younger, I did go through kind of the usual kind of literary stage of like Roald Dahl, and I really liked a writer called Philip Ridley as well. And I didn't read prolifically, but I used to, when I got into an author like that, I would read all their books sort of very quickly. So I wouldn't say there was any one particular author that made me think I want to write because of you. I just always wanted to, to make stories.
So you decided to do a degree in creative writing.
Yeah.
That's quite interesting. I mean, it's a kind of relatively new departure, isn't it, in writing, that you can actually train somebody.
Yeah.
What was previously just a profession or a calling in some senses, now you can actually go to study it.
Yeah.
How did you find it?
It's a strange one, really, because I don't think it's not something that I think you can. Like, no one can teach you how to do it. You have to teach yourself how to do it. So I think a big part of it was reading. When I was doing the course, I also got a job working at Waterstones, and I ended up just reading, loads and loads of books. And I think that was as much of an education as anything. But what the course does, I think you have to put in as much as you get out of it, but it gives you deadlines, and it gives you connections, and it gets you to get a group of people to talk about your writing, which is incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
So I think it's something that you have to go in wanting to get something out of it, because you could easily kind of fall by the wayside if you're just kind of doing the bare minimum. A lot of the work, obviously writing, you do most of it in your own time at home. You can't be sat there in class working on your novel. But in terms of deadlines and the help you receive, it was kind of really, really good, especially the masters. I thought that was kind of.
I suppose one of the things it gives you is discipline. The
Yeah.
idea that you have to, if this is what you want to do, this is what you have to do to produce, rather than just whenever the muse overtakes you.
Yeah, and you do feel a bit lost when you're finished, because you have that thing where every 2 weeks you have to submit a piece of work, and so to have that regular deadline, it does make you sort of write every night when you get home from work, because you know that you've got this. Whereas without that, you kind of think, "Oh, I'll do it later." You're always going to do it later, So it was very helpful for that. Yeah.
So when did you start writing the novel, Alice on the Fly?
That was it was on the first year of the course. It was 2010 that I started that, and I wrote the first chapter. I knew I wanted to write a novel on using the masters because I wanted to use those deadlines and use the time to kind of come up with something substantial that I could possibly get published. So I wrote this. I wrote one chapter of it. It was kind of an old idea I had from a while ago. The first chapter is kind of about a child on a bus who kind of follows this girl home because he's in love with her, and and it's kind of this nice circular kind of thing where he's on the bus route and it's all describing his sort of relationship with her. So I had this idea for the first chapter, and I wrote it and I submitted it to Writing on the Wall competition called Pulp Idol, which is a really good competition. It's still going. And in that you have to submit the first chapter of a novel, and you have to stand up and read it in front of a group of people, which is obviously very scary, but very good as well. I mean, it makes you think a lot more about kind of the performance element of writing, because really a good piece of writing, you should be able to read it out and hold an audience. And if you're thinking about the fact that you literally have to do that, it makes you kind of think very differently about how you're going to write. Yeah. But then I actually won that competition, which was a great kind of boost in confidence. And on one of the judging panel was an editor from a publisher called Tyndall Street Press, and so that was a big kind of boost because I won the competition, and he kind of gave me his card and said, send me it when it's finished. And I had the one chapter, yeah. So then I kind of had to pull my socks up and get to work. So that's what I did.
And you managed to find an agent, and you managed to find a publisher,
yeah.
And all this at this gracefully young age of 27.
Yeah, well, it was kind of. I think I had a lot of luck on my side, which I think you need. Yeah. But I managed to get an agent through the sort of the Writing on the Wall competition and being in touch with this publisher. Then an agent came to our university to do a talk, and she'd heard that I'd been approached by this publisher, so she spoke to her about it, and then sent her my manuscript when it was sort of half finished, and she said that she was interested, and kind of that spurred me on a bit. She gave me some help, some pointers, and then I finished it, and but there's no guarantees. That's the thing about it. So all you're devoting years of your life to this kind of novel, and you think, and all the while in the back of your mind you're thinking, what if it never gets published? This is all wasted time. But then when I'd finished I'd sent her the finished manuscript. A few weeks later she got in touch, and I was invited into the Hodder building to sit down and have breakfast with the editor, and I was like, this is weird. Yeah. So it was like a dream come true, really.
Fantastic. And is there anything else in the pipeline?
Yeah. So it's the deal I signed was a 2-novel deal, so I've got to write another one. It's not a sequel, but I'm contractually obliged to write another one, so that's kind of a good kind of way to spare me on. So I'm working on that now. Obviously, with this one having just come out a couple of weeks ago, I'm having to do a lot of kind of promotional stuff for this at the minute. But when it's all died down, I'm looking forward to just getting back to sitting down and writing again.
But you enjoy the promotional stuff as well?
I enjoy that. Yeah, I enjoy it to a level, but I'm not much of an extrovert, as you can probably tell. So I'm not much of a performer, really. I'm much happier at home, in my room, kind of writing.
You say it's not a sequel, but it's in the same kind of area in terms of its kind of audience, its demographic.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. I mean, to me, it's completely different because you spend so long with a character and a story that you kind of once it's done. I mean, for me, I'm ready to kind of jump the opposite way and do find something else to write about. But I guess, I mean, I was reading back over it not that long ago, and I guess it does have the same kind of, like, it's sort of kind of humour, and there's like a dark kind of feeling to it that is the same as in this. So I guess I can't escape that because it's me who's written it again. Yeah. But so I think hopefully it'll appeal to anyone who likes this.
They talk about the difficult second album syndrome.
Yeah.
You've got the difficult second novel syndrome as well.
Yeah, I think it's always that way because you get as long as you want to work on the first one.
But I suppose if it's something that you would have done anyway because you enjoy it, then that will carry you through. Yeah.
But also, I think you learn a lot of lessons with the first one as well, with how you write and what you write and the amount a lot more kind of you've got a lot more experience with how long things take and what you've got to put into it. So I think in a way it's easier writing the second one. It's just there is just then that expectation, which is like you said.
Okay, well, thanks very much for talking about Alice on the Fly. We're going to be hearing from you more in the second part of the show. But for the moment, James Rice, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome back. James Rice joins us again to talk about one of his favourite texts, the short novel Runt, published in 2007 by the Liverpool-born writer Niall Griffiths. So, James, tell us a little bit about this text and why you chose it.
Well, this was hard because I think it's hard for anyone who reads a lot to pick a favourite novel. So the reason I picked this one was because it's sort of a slight influence on my novel. In that I read it. It was a few years. I read it when it first came out, which was a few years, before I started. But it's kind of a similar-ish kind of. It's a teen narrator who's got sort of a limited vocabulary, which I think is something quite interesting. Like, because Niall Griffiths, he's a Liverpool writer. He lives in Wales. He's written like quite a few books, and they're all brilliant. I really like him. And he's got a really good kind of use of language, and often he writes sort of phonetically, that kind of way that Irvine Welsh has kind of trademarked in a way, of kind of using accents and kind of really the way people speak to kind of get proper inside a character's head, which is something I really enjoy. But in this book, he's sort of limited himself deliberately. Like, I've heard him talk about the book, and he said that he's given himself a limited vocabulary of so many hundred words, and has had to be experimental with those words. So it's all inside of this sort of 16-year-old's head, which is I've just found really interesting, and there's sort of certain similarities between his character and mine. They're both sort of prone to these kind of fits, which in his is kind of because he's an epileptic, the child, and he calls them sort of my times. And this is the thing about the kind of experimenting with the language. He's got all kind of different words for everything. Like his uncle, who's a drunk, he calls drunkle, and kind of his stepdad he calls not dad, and it's got all these kind of great little kind of quirks in it. But I just thought this was a good book that kind of linked to my own.
It's quite dark as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it has. It is quite dark. It's got sort of a dark art to it, which mine does as well. But it deals with a lot of issues. Like, it's about basically a young boy who's kicked out of his house by his mum for sort of fighting with his stepdad and whatever. And he's sent up to live with his uncle, who's having a hard time because his wife's just committed suicide, and he's an alcoholic. But while he's up there, he goes up there with his dog on. But while he's up there, they kind of get into sort of a slight adventure, trying to find a lot of local people are trying to find something that's been killing the sheep up in the mountains. There's like some kind of, like, they don't know what it is. They kind of think it's maybe a wild cat or something up there that's kind of killing these animals. But he's kind of, in his head, it's like this monster, and there's a really horrible character in it as well, who's kind of I won't ruin the ending, but it all leads to quite a dramatic ending. But I just really appreciate, because it's only quite a short novel, but you really get into this character and his head and the way that he thinks, and it's also just kind of a lovely novel as well. It leaves you, although it's quite dark, it leaves you feeling kind of warm and hopeful about the world, which is always nice.
It's always a sign of a kind of good writer, I think that they can create characters with such memorable voices
Yeah,
that the kind of language lives on after the end of the book. And I suppose we
absolutely.
are talking about teenage characters with kind of dark issues. I mean, the ghost of Holden Caulfield is kind of
Yeah,
hovering in the background. All these texts, isn't he?
it is.
The
Yeah,
whole genre, in some
it
senses.
is kind of like a genre, sort of catcher in the rye genre. Like I remember looking through all the books in Waterstones once that were kind of had teen narrators, and they all refer to Catcher in the Rye in the quote. And you kind of, me and my mate once got this whole load of them just to pile them together to see how many we could get. And there's kind of there's a Bret Easton Ellis book that's referred to as Catcher in the Rye for the MTV generation, and there's Catcher in the Rye for, you know, set in Wales or whatever, and and it's kind of, they all kind of refer back to that as a kind of genre in itself. But it's an interesting genre, I think, because you have got this this sort of strange thing where a teenager is kind of naive about some things, but kind of knowing about other things. So it's kind of, they've got one foot in kind of childhood and one foot in adulthood. And I think you can use that. And that's what I was sort of trying to do with my book. Just use that to sort of a different way to view the world.
Yeah.
Sort of, in some ways it's innocent, and in some ways, because it's a teenager, it's quite cynical at the same time without really understanding the world. So I think it's really interesting.
What's almost the definition of the teenager, the adolescent, is that they're a kind of liminal, borderline kind of identity, aren't they?
Yeah,
they're caught between childhood and adulthood, and they're both their bodies and their minds are pulling them in different directions. So
yeah, and it is that kind of transitional period where you're finding out who you are, and I think it's quite a romantic time as well, which is kind of part of the reason why I made it in my book, because like in Runters, he's kind of in love with this older lady. Well, let's say in love, he's kind of in lust with her in a way, but he really likes her. But it's also romantic and kind of sweet, because it's kind of that teenage love thing is kind of, you know, when you're a teenager and you fall in love, it's like there's something like magical about it. I think.
Why must I be a teenager in love?
Yeah, exactly.
Where have I heard that one before?
Yeah.
Is it the fact then that a lot of this kind of experience, this angst that you're kind of discussing, is expressed in other media, for example? We find it in popular music, obviously.
Yeah.
And sometimes in film as well. But maybe the literary genre or the literary media was kind of late in kind of cottoning on to it.
Yeah, I think especially with like that kind of like that angst and love as well. I think within like my book, I wrote it in second person, so it's addressed to the girl that he's in love with, which is kind of it's a trick really to try and keep it romantic without having it being, you know, sentimental. Is kind of what I was trying to do. You know, have it romantic in subtle ways like that. But like if you look at any pop song, every pop song that's a love song is written in second person. It's always you, and you know,
Yeah.
the main thing.
So when you're writing your own novel, was there issues of language that you had to deal with as well? You say, you know, Niall Griffith set himself a very specific task here.
It's hard because I think when you're writing, it's the natural thing. The thing that you want to do is you want to kind of impress people with how clever you are. I think I've got a theory that's why the only reason anyone writes really is because they want to kind of show off. And I think you can, when you write, you know, if you spend like years writing something, you can make yourself seem very clever, but not if you're trying to write as a teenager, because obviously their use of language is limited. So it is something I was very conscious of. Like I have heavily edited, you know, parts of the novel and cut parts out that I thought, you know, it's not something that's sort of needs to be part of the book. It's just me showing off in a way. And you know, just trying to stick to his voice, which I think it is important, and I hope I've succeeded anyway.
Yeah, well, it would be difficult. I mean, otherwise, wouldn't it? The success of the narrative, the believability of the character depends upon that kind of voice being maintained.
Yeah, exactly.
And kind of the reader investing in it in some sense.
Especially when it's just. I mean, there are parts in my book where you kind of get out of the first person, because it does have. It has these it's interspersed with these sort of police transcripts, just like transcripts of police interviews, which is kind of throughout it. But apart from that, you're always in his head. And I think if you're going to be in someone's head for that long, you've got to keep it believable.
Yeah.
It's got to always be his voice. Otherwise, you'd notice.
The other issue that's interesting, I think, is the setting that it's in. It's a kind of rural novel, Runted, and yours isn't.
No, mine's suburban, but I guess Runt is he's up on a hill in Wales, and mine's in a sort of a fictional suburb in a very sort of well-to-do town. But I guess the writing I'm doing now is actually set in Wales, which is kind of, so when I was rereading this today, I was thinking, I need to read this properly so I can use it as inspiration for my new one as well, because I think it is a kind of great setting, especially for that novel. Like, I think it kind of, you've got all this sort of folklore and mythology that is, and he's brilliant at describing kind of the Welsh countryside and stuff anyway. So it's very much a part of that novel, I think.
Well, thanks very much, and coming and talking to us about it today. James Rice, thanks very much, and good luck with the novel.
Thank you.
It's Alice and the Fly, published by Hodder and Stoughton. If you have any comments or suggestions, please contact the show at artsalivebooks@baytvliverpool.com. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.